Was the whole Matthew Shepard situation a lie?
Matt's been gone now longer than he was alive.
Let me also take a moment here to offer my prayers and my condolences to the family of Matthew Shepard.
Matt had never met his attackers. They were total strangers to him.
A gay college student leaves a bar with two men he'd just met. The next day, Matthew Shepard is found beaten beyond recognition.
One of the things that we all understood was that if this could happen here in our community and to someone like Matt, this could happen anywhere and could happen to anyone.
And does it matter if it was? What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. Before we get started, I'm just going to ask, as always, that you like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to comment just to help me on the algorithm, but you don't know what to comment, just leave a knife. The other gays are going to come for my neck on this one. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. But I do have to talk about it because here's the way it went down. What happened was I had made the video about Pride. I'll put it right here. But I mentioned that Bill Clinton had recognized June as Pride Month officially, and it was in the wake of the Matthew Shepard thing, which, in case you guys aren't familiar, I'm not going to pretend everybody should know. It's just me as a gay man that was coming up during that time. This was one of the biggest things for the gay community as far as cautionary tales and be scared and be aware, and family members were worried for us. So I'll start off by telling you guys, Matthew Shepard was this really cute, really innocent looking 21-year-old twink, and it was a very horrific hate crime, so everybody was on alert. All the gays families, it was that kind of situation. And what was so scary about the Matthew Shepard situation for us as young gay men at that time was that it was sold to us as Matthew Shepard had been lured by these two boys, cute boys if you ask me, kind of trashy white boys, my type, but he had been lured by these two cute boys to leave this bar with them, one of the local bars in Laramie, Wyoming, and then as they were on their way out to go wherever they were going to go to make it happen, that's when they attacked him, and then he ended up dying subsequently. And for me, it was very scary because that's such a terrible way to go. You think you're about to have a threesome, a good old poke and choke, a spit roast, some would say, the double ding-a-ling special, and instead you end up getting scarecrowed to a fence. But on top of that, the way that it had always been pitched to us, and this is very important, is that he did not know the two other guys, the two assailants, the two now convicted of his murderization. That's very important. I want you guys to keep that in mind. So what happened was that went down, and then that was the first year that a president, who happened to be Bill Clinton at that time, recognized June as being Pride Month. So I mentioned that in my video about the history of Pride. So I got a comment that was from another gay man, and he was like, I'm a gay man, and Matthew Shepard was a drug addict, and his murder wasn't a hate crime, it was over drugs and money. He went on for a minute, but he said enough stuff that there was a part of me that felt like, okay, well, he's not just making this up, it doesn't seem. But then there was also a part of me that felt like, why does this old bitter queen hate Matthew Shepard so much? Matthew Shepard has always been the gay Marilyn Monroe, just playing he was not the gay Marilyn Monroe. But you get the similarity. He died young. Never mind. And I am going to have a little bit of fun with this one because it's been 25 years since it all went down. And if I can't have a little bit of fun when I'm discussing dark topics, then there's no point in me doing anything at all. Of course, there's going to be parts where I have to be serious because it's a very serious thing, but this guy left that comment, and at first, there was a part of me that got triggered. I was thinking, like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Nobody's ever heard that Matthew Shepard was on drugs and whatever else this guy is saying, but overall, he seemed cool enough. He didn't seem just like a bitter queen. It's just easy to dismiss somebody as a bitter queen. I've been called a bitter queen a lot, but it's easy to dismiss somebody that way when they're saying something that's completely foreign to what you've thought your entire life, or your entire adult life in this case. So even though I was triggered, I was like, let me not argue with this man, because really I can do a little research and then quickly come back and be like, okay, sir, you are full of shit. And even worse, you're full of rainbow colored shit. But turned out that there is a different theory, and it's a very well-researched theory. And I was in complete shock, dismay, because my entire adult life I've been being lied to, or potentially being lied to, by the activists. Now, I'm not going to say this is 100% true. I'm not taking it as gospel. But when things like this happen, I do wonder why the community, the powers that be, don't want to let us know these stories. And I have a theory on that. We'll get to it by the end of the video. But the most comprehensive thing I found on it was in The Guardian. I also saw a video on YouTube where the author was doing a book signing, and of course doing the Q&A before the book signing. So let's get into the story. I'm gonna read it to you guys, and you guys can decide where you're at on it. Feel free to let me know down below in the comments if you have any other information on this, but this is what I ended up finding. Oh, and I also want to say before we go any further that even if this didn't go down just as a random hate crime and was inspired by something else like the article suggests, in no way am I saying or implying that I think that Matthew Shepard deserved it if it did go down this way, or that it wasn't horrible and brutal and everything else. I'm just saying sometimes it's important for us to hear another theory if it seems to be backed up with some sort of research. I mean, to me, it's at least worth talking about. So let's keep moving. Like I said, this is a Guardian headline: Matthew Shepard murder. What it came down to is drugs and money. Subheadline: in 1998, Matthew Shepard was brutally murdered in Wyoming, the apparent victim of gay hate. But a new book suggests fresh answers may lie in the crystal meth subculture of his hometown. For 15 years, Matthew Shepard's unspeakably brutal murder on a lonely prairie in Wyoming has been a byword for the very worst of American anti-gay bigotry and a rallying cry for a more tolerant, more inclusive society. The 21-year-old University of Wyoming student was found trussed to a fence, bleeding and half frozen to death in a rocky field on the outskirts of Laramie. He had been pistol whipped so severely that his brainstem was crushed.
He had suffered 18 blows to the head, 4 skull fractures. One of the fractures had crushed his brainstem, so his chances for recovery were very slim. And if he did recover, the chances he would be the Matt we knew were highly unlikely.
His killers even removed his shoes on the off chance he broke free of his bonds and tried to run to safety. Shepard's death inspired the play The Laramie Project, later turned into a television movie, countless songs, a foundation devoted to his memory, and a political lobbying effort that pressed for and eventually obtained a new federal hate crime statute named after him, which technically, I want to interrupt real quick, it was called the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Protection Act.
When Matt was murdered in '98, there were existing federal hate crime laws and some in states. Not all the state laws covered the gay community, and none of the federal laws covered the gay community. So the next logical step was to include it in new federal hate crime legislation. When President Obama was elected, we knew that this was a man who understood everything about social justice and injustice. So we felt we had a chance, and indeed we did. In 2009, President Obama signed into law the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act.
Which, in case you guys aren't familiar, what the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Protection Act did was it expanded the federal hate crimes law to include crimes based on a victim's sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. And a lot of people don't talk about the James Byrd Jr. part though, but a lot of us didn't even know, including me until recently, that James Byrd Jr. was included on that. I remember somewhat hearing about James Byrd Jr. when I was younger, but it definitely wasn't emblazoned in my memory the way Matthew Shepard was. And in my opinion, that's all about marketing, because James Byrd Jr. was a 49-year-old black man, unalived in Texas, in an at least equally horrific way, as in he got chained to the back of a truck and then dropped off in front of a black church. So I think it was really about marketing at that point though, and I'm not being silly when I say that, because James Byrd, like I said, was a 49-year-old black man, and then you've got this cute 20-something, very innocent looking boy, and that at that time probably would make America more sympathetic.
One of the reasons that Matt's story resonated with so many people, because people looked at Matt's picture and heard about Matt's story, and they pictured their own son or nephew and thought, what if that happened to the kid that I know and love?
I'm not trying to say everything's based on race, but sometimes when it comes to marketing, white's gonna sell. It ain't called a white sale for nothing. Oh, just playing. But let me go on. Okay, so all this creative energy has been based on an important central premise that Shepard was targeted solely because of his sexual orientation. According to conventional wisdom, he met his killers by chance in a bar, told them he was gay, and left with them when they appeared to respond to his advances. They started attacking him almost as soon as he climbed into their pickup. It now appears, however, that the conventional wisdom may be wrong. A new book by investigative journalist Stephen Jimenez has challenged many of the central assumptions about Shepard's murder and argues that anti-gay hatred was not the primary motivation for his killing.
In 2004, Stephen Jimenez produced the first report that complicated the hate crime narrative around Matthew Shepard's death. He went on to spend years researching and in 2013 published The Book of Mad, an authoritative history of the murder.
If it was a factor at all. Instead, Jimenez makes a persuasive case based on interviews with the murderers, their former girlfriends, friends of Shepard's, and police investigators that Shepard was already acquainted with his killers, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson. That acquaintance hardly cast Shepard in the best light. All three of them, Jimenez argues, were involved in Laramie's crystal meth subculture as users and dealers. McKinney and Shepard may also have had a casual sexual relationship. Shepard's sexual preference certainly wasn't the motive in the homicide, Jimenez quotes police investigator Ben Fritzen as saying.
At the time of the case, I was a detective on the Laramie Police Department.
So if it wasn't about homophobia, what was it about?
It was about methamphetamine and, you know, the money behind it, and Aaron trying to get his hands on more of it.
What it came down to really is drugs and money. A number of other sources close to the story and the protagonist confirmed much the same thing. As Jimenez reconstructs it, McKinney was coming down from a week-long meth binge.
Matt wasn't because he was gay. He was because those guys were strung out and hadn't slept for days.
And desperate to cover his mounting debts. He believed, rightly or wrongly, that Shepard could lead him to a delivery of about $10,000 worth of meth coming in from Denver, which he intended to steal. McKinney's plan was to beat the information out of Shepard, but the beating, fueled by severe drug-induced paranoia, ran quickly out of control. And if you've ever done meth, you know that kind of shit can happen. Jimenez's findings have sparked outrage from gay rights groups who see his book as an act of betrayal. Jimenez is himself gay. The Matthew Shepard Foundation has accused him of succumbing to factual errors, rumors, and innuendo to build a sensationalist conspiracy theory and drag Shepard's name through the mud. And I get that, especially since I believe it's Matthew Shepard's mother that runs that foundation. You would rather consider your son the martyr in a hate crime than just another tweaker that ended up in an out-of-control situation. And I'm not trying to be insensitive when I say that, but you know that's the way people are going to see it otherwise. But let's keep going. Their outrage has been mirrored on the other side of the political spectrum by some social conservatives crowing that the gay grievance industry has taken a knocking. And if that happened, it has. The picture Jimenez paints of Shepard is certainly far from angelic. He traces a history of depression, of heavy drinking, of crystal meth and heroin use, and a lurid series of sexual misadventures, including episodes of rape and molestation. And you know what? I'm going to tell you guys, just as a person who used to get down like that when I was younger, I used to party with that drug. It really will take you down some very depraved roads as far as what you're allowing to happen to you, what you'll consent to. It really is the kind of thing that just mentally takes you different places. And before you know it, you've done some stuff. So when it comes to all this part, I do not judge Matthew Shepard even a little bit. And any gay man that's actually watching this right now and has partied with that drug, there's an entire subgenre of sexual activity that's referred to as party and play, and that's where people do meth together and really get down, and it'll be hours and hours and hours that you'll be having these encounters, and I'm not exaggerating to you guys even a little bit. And so I'm not saying I judge him for that, but again, I can see how his family and the foundation and even the gay community would rather be like, let's not mention that part. Okay, but Jimenez is also careful to point out that his goal is to understand Shepard as a complex human being and make the fullest possible possible sense of his murder, not to suggest in any way that he deserved his horrific fate. We have enshrined Matthew's tragedy as a passion play and folktale, he writes, but hardly ever for the truth of what it was or who he was, much to our own diminishment. Jimenez's problem is that he has trodden on hollowed ground. America, as John Ford cannily observed in his Western, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, is a country that likes to build up its heroes and villains and rarely appreciates having the record corrected to restore them to the stature of ordinary, fallible human beings. By now, Shepard's story has been elevated close to legend, and Shepard himself to a near messianic figure who suffered for the ultimate benefit of the rest of us. And that's kind of what bothers me, is that we really have been led to believe he was just this perfect boy, and out of nowhere, this tragedy just hit him. And it does kind of take away from the narrative and what we've all thought has been going on all this time. But we'll keep going. Some of the early news reports even had him tied to the fence like Christ on the cross. Yet another detail Jimenez debunks by quoting the lead detective in the murder, saying he was in fact found sitting on the ground, head slumped, with his hands tied behind his back. Jimenez does not have all the answers, as his detractors have pointed out. Many of his sources have changed stories multiple times over the years. That's what you get for dealing with tweakers. Anyway, others from the drug underworld seem inherently unreliable. Others still are quoted anonymously. That in turn has spurred long-standing accusations, notably from GLAAD, the gay rights advocacy group, that he has twisted the facts to fit a foregone conclusion. You know, GLAAD has a lot of nerve, because GLAAD has been twisting a lot of facts for a long time to make things the way that they want them to be. GLAAD is one of the organizations that I think hurts us the most when it comes to LGBT advocacy and LGBT rights. GLAAD is in the way. And if GLAAD is against this guy, I'm more likely to believe his story, because GLAAD seems like it would be quick to cover up anything that didn't go with their regular fundraising. But many of Jimenez's central contentions are shared by the prosecutor in the case, Cal Raruca, and by police officers who investigated the murder. When you cast a play in hell, and methamphetamine is hell, Raruca hauntingly observes, you're not going to get angels for actors. He wrote that. Swept up in gay panic. The question, of course, arises, if the authorities did not believe Shepard's murder was a hate crime, how come the rest of us were given that impression? Jimenez points out two friends of Shepard's, Alex Trout and Walt Bolden, who told the media repeatedly in the aftermath of the killing that he had been attacked because of his sexual orientation.
These people took him out and tortured him.
Neither, however, had direct knowledge of the crime. McKinney then cemented the story by arguing as his defense that he had been swept up in a gay panic and was not fully in control of his faculties. Jimenez believes that story was designed to keep the authorities away from the drug activities and protect his friends. McKinney himself eventually told Jimenez from prison that the gay panic defense was nonsense. McKinney and Henderson entered guilty pleas to avoid the death penalty and are now serving life sentences, but their roles were far from equal. Henderson acknowledged to Jimenez that he did many things wrong. He drove the pickup, tied Shepard's hands, failed to stop McKinney delivering the fatal blows, and failed to raise the alarm when they returned home. But there is no evidence he contributed directly to Shepard's death, and a better lawyer might have advised him not to fear capital charges and insist on a full jury trial. One chilling story told in the book is that 3 months after Shepard's death, Henderson's mother, Cindy Dixon, was raped and left to freeze to death in a lonely canyon near Laramie. The culprit was a friend of McKinney's. He too entered a plea deal with the prosecution, but he received a far less severe punishment despite the similarities to the Shepard murder, and was back on the streets in 4 years. So I guess it was all the media attention that made it so much severe for the others, and the fact that they probably felt like they had to make an example out of those two guys, because that is pretty much the same thing. Even worse, the rape involved. Jimenez points to the distorting effect of the media as one reason for the discrepancy. The media, in his eyes, also played a role in mythologizing Shepard and discouraging deeper inquiries into what happened and why it was easier in the end to believe that an over-trusting young gay man faced grave danger simply because he was living in the macho cowboy culture of the prairie. Tangled secrets of this landmark crime persist, Jimenez writes, and many people, it seems, are happy to leave them undiscovered. Yeah, so if you guys want to actually check out this guy's work, I haven't bought the book yet, but I'm sure I will end up buying the book, and this is one of the few things that I will read. If you guys know me, I'm not a big reader. I'm not trying to flaunt that. It's just, it is a little bit hard for me to read. Got a little bit of a disability, I'm sure of it. I'm the kind of person that has to read something over and over. Like, it takes a lot of editing for me to read anything, even on this channel. So whenever you guys see me doing that, you're welcome. It was a lot of work. But what I'm getting at is, it's called The Book of Matt, and I am going to actually order it, and I am going to actually sit down and read it, because I do want to hear the details. Because what Jimenez said when he did his Q&A was that the guy that was actually in charge of delivering the blows to Matthew Shepard, Aaron McKinney, I believe was his name, he actually had been very well versed in messing around with other guys. And like I read there, him and Matthew Shepard may have had a casual encounter at some point. And also, there was one thing I read where they even said that Aaron McKinney and Matthew Shepard were even being pimped by the same person at a point. So for me, it's kind of interesting that that's the person that went to do it. And it just seems like the gay community wanted to lie to us because they needed this particular figure, and he happened to fit the bill as far as the way that he looked, as far as his age range. He just was able to sell what they needed to sell, because they needed to sell fear to America. And I don't think only for the purpose of helping out with gay rights and expanding the hate crime legislation. I really do feel it's partly because they knew that this kid was a cash cow. They're making money off of the memory of Matthew Shepard to this day. They're selling fear off of the look of Matthew Shepard to this day. So I don't believe that GLAAD and the other organizations, including at this point the Matthew Shepard Foundation, I do not believe for 1 minute that this is all altruistic and in our best interest as the gay community. I really do feel that this was used to sell and push a particular narrative that would sell and push an entire industry. The Laramie Project, that play has played a lot of places. I'm sure there's licensing involved with that. Then there's also the fundraising that has always been done in Matthew Shepard's name, which, as far as him dying 25 years ago, the way that the gay community has really held on to this, it feels like yesterday, because they love to remind us all the time of Matthew Shepard. And like I said, I don't think that he deserves it, and I don't think that it makes him an unsympathetic character if it didn't go down the way that they sold us. But I do think that that does speak to the dishonesty of LGBT activists and what I've been saying all along in the present day. Because another thing I should tell you is this article actually came out in 2013, and I think I saw reports about it as early as 2009, when I was doing research. And so it's like, for this long, there has been a theory out there that things didn't go down exactly the way that we had been told they had gone down, and rather than LGBT media like The Advocate or the different publications, Pink News, that a lot of us in the gay community know to be trusted sources of LGBT media, which none of them are, trust me. LGBT media is the worst by far. It's gay propaganda. That's really what it is. And I don't say that just because of my personal feelings. There are times when I read one article from an LGBT publication, and I'll read another article on the same thing from a more mainstream publication, and not necessarily a right-leaning or a far right-leaning publication, but it'll just be a regular mainstream publication, and there will be a lot of things cleaned up to make it seem like the LGBT community has completely clean hands or isn't in any way responsible. And when they do that, it makes things seem very fishy. I think that there's that situation going on where the gay community doesn't want you to hear about this because it can hurt all the fundraising they've done and really hurt their credibility if that were to come out as being confirmed. Also, I think the people of Laramie, Wyoming wouldn't be the most interested in getting this story out in any other way, because they've already had enough bad press from the fact that that's been their story forever now. People, at least gay people, think of Laramie, Wyoming, and right away think of the Matthew Shepard hate crime. So that's been their reputation. So now what? They're going to make their reputation even worse and be the meth city from now on, or have people see it that way, or that's what they would think the perception would be. So I understand that. Then there's also the officers that were maybe a little bit more directly involved. They would have to basically admit to being part of a cover-up. And then there's also, like they said, even to this day, the thing with Aaron McKinney, a lot of times when people are in that drug life, they end up being in that drug life forever. And so while those guys may be in prison for the rest of their lives now, because they're both in prison without parole, and they say the one kid, Henderson is his last name, they say that he has been such a model prisoner that they've tried to suggest him possibly being released, but the judge and the courts aren't going to go back on it. And supposedly, you know, other people are fighting to make sure he doesn't. And, you know, even though he didn't actually deliver the blows, maybe some would think that he never deserves to get out. I don't know that I completely believe that, but at the same time, it is what it is. But what I was trying to say is a lot of times when people are living that drug life, they end up staying in it forever. So while those two may be in prison and locked away safely, a lot of their cohorts, or some of their cohorts, or some of the bigger drug dealers, or the other people that were involved in that part of the drug trade during that time in that city might still be doing that kind of stuff, or it might be a similar game. And if a lot of that stuff gets out, then that could lead to a lot of legal trouble to maybe some of the, it's hard to use the term kingpins when you're talking about Laramie, Wyoming, but it might be a detriment to what they're doing if that were to get out. So that might give some people a reason to kind of throw this off the track as well. So there's a lot of people with a lot to lose. And I do think this author, Stephen Jimenez, was really just trying to figure out the story.
Several journalists, led by Stephen Jimenez, went looking for the truth. And what they discovered upended everything we thought we knew about Matthew Shepard.
He had no reason to believe that that wasn't the story. It was only upon investigating and digging that he ended up being like, oh, this may not have been what we've all been told that it was. So then he started digging more and interviewing more people, and it just consumed his life from what he said at his Q&A. So then it turned out to be what it was, and that's why he put the book out the way that he did. So you guys can let me know what you think down below in the comments. But for me, this is just more evidence. The LGBT activists really are trying to keep us in a perpetual state of fear so that they can push things through that they feel are important, and also so that they can raise the money that they need to raise so that they can continue to keep their jobs. And that's really the way I feel about it. And that's where I feel the most blame goes when it comes to this kind of situation. Because if anybody was benefiting from all of this, and if anybody continues to benefit from this, it is definitely the LGBTQ activist and political lobbyist. That's who benefits from this lie. Anyway, like I said, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. As always, this has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.